The Edwards family lived an ordinary life in the small, quiet town of Fairview, Ohio. Robert Edwards, a soft-spoken accountant, was well known for his dedication to his job and his family. He was the kind of man who never missed a PTA meeting or a soccer game for his children. His wife, Marie, was a beloved third-grade teacher at the local elementary school. She had an infectious smile and a warmth that made everyone feel comfortable in her presence. They had two children, Lily, 10, and Ben, 8. The siblings were inseparable, often seen riding their bikes together down the tree-lined streets of Willow Street or playing with their friends in the nearby park. The Edwards home was always filled with life and laughter, a place where the neighbors knew they could always drop by for a cup of coffee or a quick chat. Their house, a modest two-story colonial with white shutters and a neatly trimmed lawn, stood out for its charm. The front porch swing was always in gentle motion, and flower boxes filled with colorful blooms framed the windows. To anyone passing by, the Edwards family seemed like the perfect picture of small-town harmony. However, as summer began to settle into July 1983, an unspoken tension began to creep into their home. It was subtle at first, just little things that Marie would mention to Robert in passing. "I could have sworn I left the kitchen light off," she'd say, puzzled, after returning home from work to find it on. Or, "Did you hear someone moving around upstairs last night?" Robert dismissed these occurrences, chalking them up to forgetfulness or the usual sounds an old house makes as it settles. But over time, the strange incidents became harder to ignore. Lily mentioned that her favorite doll had gone missing, only to reappear days later in a different room. Ben, too young to articulate what he felt, had started waking up in the middle of the night, crying and complaining about someone standing in the hallway. The Edwards family brushed it off, attributing the children's fears to nightmares and overactive imaginations. Life continued on, and by mid-July, the family had nearly forgotten about the strange happenings. That is, until the night of July 17th. That evening started just like any other. The family had spent the day together at a local fair, returning home late in the afternoon. After a quick dinner, they gathered in the living room to watch one of their favorite TV shows. The sun had just set, casting a golden hue through the windows, and everything seemed perfectly normal. As the hours passed, the children grew sleepy. Marie took them upstairs, tucking them into their beds with soft kisses on their foreheads, just like she did every night. Afterward, she returned to the living room where Robert was dozing on the couch. She smiled at the peaceful scene, grateful for the life they had built together. But something felt off. The air in the house seemed heavier than usual. The familiar creaks of the house now sounded louder, more pronounced. Marie tried to shake the feeling, convincing herself it was nothing more than the exhaustion of a long day. As the clock struck 10:30 p.m., Marie and Robert decided to call it a night. They made their way upstairs, locking the doors behind them and checking on the kids before heading to bed. Everything seemed fine. The house was still, the neighborhood quiet. It was a typical night in Fairview. But the next morning, everything changed. The first person to notice something wrong was Mr. Jenkins, the elderly mailman who had been delivering letters on Willow Street for over 30 years. When he reached the Edwards house, he noticed something strange. The front door was wide open. This was unusual for the Edwards, who were always diligent about keeping their house secure. Curious, Jenkins approached the door, calling out for Robert or Marie. There was no answer. He hesitated for a moment, but something in his gut told him to step inside. As he crossed the threshold into the quiet house, the silence felt unnatural, thick, and unnerving. The living room was perfectly intact. The TV, though off, was still humming slightly from being used the night before. On the dining room table, plates of food sat half-eaten, as if the family had suddenly left mid-meal. Marie's purse, untouched, was sitting on the couch, and a pair of children's shoes were abandoned at the base of the stairs. Jenkins called out again, louder this time. Still no response. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise, a sense of dread creeping over him. He quickly backed out of the house and hurried to call the police. When officers arrived, they, too, were struck by the eerie stillness. They conducted a thorough search of the home and the surrounding property, but found nothing. There were no signs of a struggle, no signs of forced entry. It was as if the Edwards family had simply vanished into thin air. The police continued their investigation, questioning neighbors and friends. Everyone they spoke to had the same story. The Edwards were a loving, normal family. There were no enemies, no financial troubles, no marital issues that could explain a sudden disappearance. Neighbors reported seeing the family the evening before, playing in their yard, laughing as they usually did. But after that, nothing. No one had seen or heard anything strange during the night. As the days stretched into weeks, the story of the Edwards family's disappearance became a local legend. Search parties combed the nearby woods and rivers, but no trace of the family was ever found. Their car remained in the driveway, their belongings untouched, and their bank accounts unaccessed. The house on Willow Street, once filled with laughter and warmth, now stood silent. The open front door became a haunting symbol of the Edwards' unexplained fate, and it wasn't long before the whispers began. People in town started speculating about what had happened, their imaginations running wild. Some suggested the family had run away, though that theory quickly fell apart as nothing pointed to them planning any sort of departure. Others began to speak of darker possibilities, of forces beyond their understanding. But no matter how many theories circulated, one fact remained. The Edwards family was gone, and no one could explain why. Weeks had passed since the Edwards family disappeared, and the town of Fairview remained gripped by fear and confusion. The investigation into their whereabouts had hit a dead end. The police, despite their best efforts, were unable to find any substantial leads. The neighbors, once cheerful and tight-knit, had grown wary and suspicious. People locked their doors early, and children were no longer allowed to play outside after dark. The mystery surrounding the Edwards' disappearance lingered like a dark cloud over the entire community. The house at 44 Willow Street had been left untouched since the day the family vanished. The police had combed through every inch of it multiple times, but had come up with nothing. It was as though the Edwards had evaporated into thin air, leaving behind a home frozen in time. But something about the house still unsettled the investigators. There was a nagging feeling that they had missed something, some vital clue hidden in plain sight. A month after the initial investigation began, the police brought in a new team of forensic specialists to take another look at the property. With no leads to follow, the authorities were growing desperate. Perhaps, they thought, a fresh set of eyes could uncover something that had been overlooked. And so, the investigation resumed. The specialist team arrived on a gray, humid morning, equipped with advanced tools and a mandate to be as thorough as possible. The house had been closed off for weeks, the air inside stale and heavy with the scent of dust and abandonment. As they moved through the rooms, documenting every detail, they quickly realized just how eerily undisturbed the house was. Plates of food still sat on the dining room table, long spoiled, and the TV remote lay casually on the arm of the couch as though waiting for someone to pick it up. After hours of searching the upstairs rooms, the kitchen, and the living room, the team moved down into the basement, a space the original investigators had largely overlooked. It was an old, unfinished area, with exposed brick walls and dim lighting. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable. A typical basement, filled with the usual clutter, boxes of old toys, Christmas decorations, and a dusty workbench in the corner. But one member of the team, a maintenance worker tasked with checking the electrical wiring, noticed something odd. The far wall of the basement looked different, almost as if it had been modified at some point. It was subtle, but the bricks on one section of the wall seemed newer than the others, the mortar slightly fresher. Curiosity piqued. He approached the wall and began tapping along its surface, listening for hollow spots. When he reached the center of the wall, the sound changed. His taps echoed, indicating that there was an empty space behind it. "There's something back here," he called out to the others. Within minutes, they had a sledgehammer and were carefully dismantling the section of the wall. As the bricks fell away, they revealed a hidden doorway. Behind the wall was a narrow, dark staircase leading further down into the earth. The discovery sent a ripple of excitement and unease through the team. None of the original floor plans for the house mentioned a second basement level, and there was no logical reason for the staircase to exist. The air that wafted up from the hidden space was cold and damp, carrying with it the smell of something long undisturbed. One by one, the investigators descended the narrow stairs, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The staircase was steep and poorly constructed, the walls on either side rough and unfinished. When they reached the bottom, they found themselves in a small, windowless room. The ceiling was low, and the floor was made of uneven concrete. The room was empty, save for a single, rusted metal table in the center and something even more chilling, a scattering of photographs. The investigators gathered around the table, their breath catching in their throats. The photographs were strewn across the floor, yellowed with age, but still clear enough to make out the images. They were of the Edwards family. Hundreds of photographs, each capturing the family in intimate, candid moments. Robert and Marie cooking dinner together. Lily and Ben playing in the backyard. The family watching TV in the living room, laughing, oblivious to the fact that someone or something was documenting their every move. The angles of the photos were disturbing, as if they had been taken from inside the house, watching the family through the walls. One of the investigators bent down to pick up a particularly worn photograph. It showed Marie standing at the kitchen counter, chopping vegetables. The angle of the shot was low, as if the photographer had been hiding beneath the counter, mere feet away from her. Another photo showed Ben sitting in his room, reading a comic book, completely unaware that he was being watched. As the investigators sifted through the unsettling collection of photographs, they came across the most recent ones. These were different from the others, darker, more ominous. They showed the family in the hours leading up to their disappearance. The final photo was the most disturbing of all. It was a picture of the family sitting together at the dining room table, taken on the night they vanished. The look on their faces was one of sheer terror. Their eyes were wide, their expressions frozen in fear, all staring at something just outside the frame of the photograph. Whatever they had seen that night, it was clear that it had terrified them. The investigators stood in stunned silence, unsure of what to make of the discovery. How had these photographs been taken without the family's knowledge? Who had been watching them? And more importantly, where had the Edwards family gone? There was no sign of struggle in the hidden room, no blood, no evidence of foul play, just the eerie, inexplicable photographs. The police were called in immediately, and the house was once again declared a crime scene. The hidden room and its disturbing contents deepened the mystery of the Edwards disappearance, raising far more questions than it answered. The discovery of the hidden basement and the photographs made national headlines. Paranormal enthusiasts and conspiracy theorists flocked to Fairview, convinced that the Edwards disappearance was the result of something supernatural. But the police had no answers. Despite an exhaustive investigation into the origins of the room, no fingerprints, DNA, or any other clues were found. For the investigators, the photographs were the most disturbing evidence they had ever encountered. Someone, or something, had been watching the Edwards family for a long time. But the bigger question remained. Where were they now? And what had they seen that terrified them so much? The discovery of the hidden basement and the photographs of the Edwards family sent shockwaves through the town of Fairview. Speculation about their disappearance reached fever pitch. The once quiet suburban neighborhood of Willow Street was now the epicenter of a mystery that was becoming more disturbing with every new piece of evidence. The media swarmed the area, and conspiracy theorists latched onto the story, offering wild explanations that ranged from alien abductions to occult rituals. But for the investigators, the case was growing colder, despite the grim discoveries in the house. The hidden room beneath the basement was thoroughly examined. Forensic teams scoured every inch, searching for any trace of the Edwards family or the person responsible for watching them. However, no fingerprints, fibers, or DNA were recovered from the secret space. It was as if whoever had been in that room had been a ghost, leaving behind no trace of their existence except for the chilling photographs. The photographs themselves became the focus of the investigation. Hundreds of images taken over the course of weeks, perhaps even months, captured the most intimate moments of the Edwards family's life. Some of the angles seemed impossible, as though they had been taken from inside walls, ceilings, or other hidden vantage points. The Edwards family had no idea they were being watched. This unseen voyeur had somehow managed to observe and document their every move without ever being noticed. Investigators became obsessed with how the photographs had been taken. The layout of the house was re-examined, and architects were brought in to study the structure. It soon became apparent that the house was not built in the standard way. Behind certain walls and beneath floorboards, small cavities and crawl spaces were discovered, spaces that were not on the original floor plan. These hidden areas, barely large enough for a person to move through, connected different parts of the house. It became clear someone had been living in the walls. The realization sent chills down the spines of the entire investigative team. The hidden passages allowed whoever was stalking the Edwards family to move freely throughout the house, watching them without ever being detected. The voyeur had turned the home into their personal labyrinth, a twisted system that let them peer into the family's daily life unnoticed. What terrified the investigators most was that these spaces showed signs of recent use. Scratches on the walls, footprints in the dust, and discarded food wrappers suggested that someone had been living there shortly before the Edwards disappeared. But whoever they were now gone. As disturbing as the photographs and the hidden passages were, they still didn't answer the most important question. Where was the Edwards family? The last photograph discovered, the one showing the family sitting at their dinner table, staring in terror at something unseen, became the most scrutinized piece of evidence. The terror in their eyes was unmistakable. Something had terrified them in those final moments, something they had seen or felt. The photograph was blurry at the edges, almost as if it had been taken in a hurry. Investigators searched for any clues in the background, but there was nothing, just the familiar setting of the Edwards dining room. A theory emerged that perhaps the voyeur had revealed themselves to the family that night. After months of secretly observing them, perhaps the stalker had finally stepped out from the shadows. But that theory only raised more questions. Why were there no signs of struggle? How could the entire family have been subdued so quickly and silently? And if the stalker had been living in the walls, how had they managed to escape without leaving a trace? As the investigation dragged on, the police interviewed everyone who had any connection to the Edwards family. Friends, co-workers, and neighbors were questioned, but no one had seen anything unusual in the weeks leading up to the family's disappearance. The Edwards had no known enemies, and there were no financial or personal troubles that might have led them to run away. They were a happy, loving family, or at least they had appeared to be. Some neighbors, however, began to recall strange events that they hadn't thought much of at the time. Several people mentioned seeing a man lurking near the house on a few occasions, a shadowy figure who seemed out of place in their quiet neighborhood. Others reported hearing strange noises late at night, scratching sounds, faint thuds, as if something was moving inside the walls. But no one had thought to report these occurrences, dismissing them as odd but insignificant. The police started to suspect that the voyeur had been watching the family for longer than anyone realized. Perhaps this person had been stalking them for years, slowly building up the courage to finally make their presence known. But despite these unsettling possibilities, there was still no concrete evidence pointing to who the voyeur was. The town of Fairview became gripped by paranoia. Everyone began locking their doors and windows at night. Parents refused to let their children play outside, and people whispered in hushed tones about the Edwards family's fate. Some believed the family had been taken by a deranged killer, someone who had been stalking them from within their own home. Others feared that something more supernatural was at play, especially given the eerie circumstances of the photographs and the hidden passages. The investigation continued, but hope of finding the Edwards family alive was fading. Then, something even more disturbing happened. One morning, a package arrived at the Fairview Police Department. There was no return address, and the handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar. Inside was a single photograph. It showed the Edwards house, taken from the street at night. The lights were on inside, faintly visible through the windows. But the house had been abandoned for weeks. The photograph was dated July 17th, the night the family disappeared. The discovery of the new photograph shook the investigators to their core. It suggested that whoever had taken the original photographs was still watching. But why send this new image now? Was it a taunt? A warning? The timing of the photograph's arrival was too perfect to be a coincidence. The police increased their surveillance on the house, hoping to catch whoever had sent the photograph. But days passed, and nothing happened. The house remained dark and still, as it had been since the Edwards disappeared. The new photograph reignited interest in the case, but it also deepened the mystery. How had someone taken the photograph on the night the family disappeared? And why hadn't anyone noticed? Was the voyeur still lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again? Despite the mounting evidence of someone stalking the family, the police were no closer to solving the case. The Edwards family had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only unsettling clues and more questions than answers. The photograph, the hidden room, the passages in the walls, all pointed to a terrifying conclusion. The family had been watched for a long time, and their disappearance was no accident. But the one question that haunted the investigators the most was the same one that had haunted them from the beginning. What had the Edwards family seen in those final moments, and why had they looked so afraid? The answer, it seemed, was hidden in the shadows, just beyond the frame of the last photograph. By the fall of 1983, 3 months after the Edwards family's disappearance, the house on Willow Street had become the subject of dark fascination. The unsettling discovery of the hidden room, the voyeuristic photographs, and the new photograph mailed to the police had left Fairview rattled. Neighbors who once prided themselves on their friendly community now avoided speaking about the Edwards family altogether. Fear had taken root, and the house, once the heart of a vibrant suburban life, was now the epicenter of whispers, superstitions, and dread. No one on Willow Street could forget that night. Many had seen the lights flickering inside the Edwards home after the family vanished, a phenomenon that only added to the growing sense of unease. The power company confirmed that there were no issues in the area, and yet people swore they saw the lights inside the house go on and off at random intervals. Sometimes it was just a soft glow from the upstairs bedroom, sometimes a faint pulse in the kitchen window, but always when the house was supposed to be dark and empty. The police, frustrated by the lack of progress in the investigation, had scaled back their presence around the house, but rumors continued to spread. Some said they could hear noises coming from within, footsteps pacing back and forth, faint whispers, or even the sound of furniture moving late at night. Others, who dared to drive past, claimed they saw shadows in the windows. Something was still inside that house, they said, something that shouldn't be. It wasn't long before the Edwards house earned the label of being cursed. Local teenagers, fueled by curiosity and adrenaline, began daring each other to approach the house at night. What started as harmless dares soon spiraled into a game of terror. They would gather in small groups, creeping up to the front porch, pressing their faces against the cold glass windows, and daring each other to go inside. Some said they could feel something watching them from the upstairs windows, a presence that chilled them to their bones. One group of teens went further than the others. On a dare, they broke into the house one stormy October night. Armed with nothing but flashlights and bravado, they pried open a basement window and slipped inside. The air was cold, and the house was eerily silent, the atmosphere thick with an oppressive weight. The teens nervously explored the lower floor, their jokes and laughter quickly fading as they realized the house felt wrong. It wasn't just the absence of the Edwards family. It was something deeper, something they couldn't quite explain. The walls seemed to close in on them, and the silence was deafening. They made their way to the living room, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The room was exactly as the police had left it. The furniture untouched, the plates from that last meal still sitting on the dining table, covered in dust. The house was a time capsule of that night, frozen in eerie stillness. One of the boys, Joey, dared to venture upstairs. The others hesitated, but curiosity won out, and they followed him. The narrow staircase creaked under their weight, and each step felt like they were walking deeper into something they couldn't escape. When they reached the second floor, they split up, moving into the children's bedrooms and the master bedroom. In Lily's room, the youngest of the group, Claire, spotted something unusual. A small, crumpled piece of paper wedged beneath the bed. She knelt down and pulled it out, her heart racing as she smoothed it out in the dim light of her flashlight. It was another photograph. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized it was a picture of the Edwards family, but this one was different. It wasn't one of the photos found in the hidden room. The photograph showed the family, huddled together in the living room, but their expressions were filled with panic. The image was blurry, as if taken in haste. In the background, through the window, a shadowy figure could be seen, standing outside. Claire's hand trembled as she called for the others. The group gathered around, peering at the image, a mixture of horror and disbelief etched on their faces. They didn't have long to process it. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from the floor below. They froze. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, as if someone or something was moving through the house, knowing exactly where to go. It wasn't the creaking of old wood settling, nor the sound of the wind outside. These were unmistakably human footsteps. Panic set in, and without a word, the group bolted from the room. Joey led the way, but as they reached the top of the stairs, they saw something that made them stop in their tracks. At the bottom of the staircase stood a dark figure, barely visible in the shadows, its head tilted upward, watching them. For a split second, the group stood frozen in terror. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, its presence overwhelming, an inhuman stillness radiating from it. Then, in an instant, their paralysis broke, and they fled. Pushing past each other, they scrambled back into Lily's room and slammed the door shut, barricading it with whatever furniture they could find. They could hear the footsteps again, slowly ascending the stairs. Each step was deliberate, heavy, echoing through the silence. Joey frantically tried to pry open the window, his fingers trembling as the rest of the group huddled together, their breath coming in ragged gasps. When the footsteps reached the door, everything stopped. The air became deathly still, as if the house itself was holding its breath. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the presence was gone. The teens didn't wait to find out what had happened. Joey managed to get the window open, and one by one, they climbed out, dropping to the overgrown lawn below. Without looking back, they sprinted down Willow Street, their fear driving them far from the cursed house. The next morning, word spread quickly through the town about what the teens had encountered. While many dismissed their story as an exaggeration, something about their terror-stricken faces made people reconsider. The photograph they had found in the house was now in the hands of the police, but it offered no new answers, only more questions. The figure in the background, dark and blurry, couldn't be identified. It was a ghostly silhouette, a reminder that something, or someone, was still watching the Edwards home. The police, already baffled by the case, now had to contend with growing rumors of the supernatural. Reports of lights flickering inside the house, strange noises, and shadowy figures only fueled the belief that the house was cursed. Some said the house had claimed the Edwards family, and it was waiting for its next victims. As Halloween approached, the legend of the Edwards house grew darker. No one dared to trick-or-treat on Willow Street, and even those who lived nearby began looking for excuses to move away. The house stood alone, a dark monolith on the corner, watching over the street like a predator biding its time. And though no one could explain the strange occurrences, one thing was clear. The Edwards house was no ordinary home. Something lurked within its walls, something old, something sinister, something that had yet to be revealed. And whatever it wasn't finished. By the spring of 1984, the Edwards house had become a monument to fear. The story of their disappearance, the hidden room, the eerie photographs, and the terrifying encounter with the teenagers who broke in the previous fall were now part of the town's folklore. The house loomed large in the imagination of Fairview, a dark presence at the end of Willow Street, watching over the quiet neighborhood like a predator waiting to strike again. No one dared to approach the house anymore. Neighbors moved away, unwilling to live in the shadow of a place with such a chilling reputation. The house had fallen into disrepair, windows cracked, paint peeling, and the once perfect lawn overgrown with weeds. It was as though the house itself was decaying, reflecting the malevolent force that seemed to lurk within its walls. Yet, despite the growing fears, the investigation into the Edwards family's disappearance had gone cold. The police had exhausted every lead, every theory. The photographs, the hidden passages, the strange noises, and the sightings of shadowy figures. It all pointed to something deeply sinister, but nothing concrete could be found. The house, once the site of such joy and warmth, was now a crime scene with no answers. Then, in March of 1984, a new family moved into town, the Reeds. They had no idea about the house's dark history when they purchased it at a rock-bottom price. Michael Reed, his wife, Sarah, and their teenage daughter, Megan, were eager to start fresh after moving from out of state. The house on Willow Street, with its spacious rooms and charming appearance, despite the state of disrepair, seemed like the perfect place to begin their new life. Fairview's residents tried to warn them. Neighbors cautiously approached, telling them about the strange occurrences and the curse that seemed to cling to the house. But the Reeds were practical people, not easily swayed by ghost stories or local superstitions. They believed in logic, not legends. The Edwards house, in their minds, was nothing more than an old house with an unfortunate history. They were wrong. For the first few days, everything was quiet. The Reeds busied themselves with unpacking and making the house their own. Michael focused on repairs, cleaning up the yard, fixing the plumbing, and painting the walls. Sarah spent her days transforming the home into something warm and welcoming, while Megan explored her new surroundings, excited to make friends and settle into her new school. But the sense of normalcy didn't last. It started with small things, subtle enough to be dismissed as the quirks of an old house. Light bulbs would flicker unpredictably, even after being replaced. Doors that had been closed were found open, and sometimes the family would hear faint creaks and whispers in the night, sounds they attributed to the house settling. But soon, the incidents became impossible to ignore. One night, just a week after they had moved in, Sarah woke up around 3 a.m., feeling a cold draft despite the windows being shut. As she lay there, trying to figure out where the air was coming from, she heard a noise, footsteps slow and deliberate, moving down the hallway outside their bedroom. At first, she thought it was Megan, maybe heading to the bathroom, but when she got up to check, she found the hallway empty. The cold draft seemed to follow her as she walked through the house, and a deep sense of unease settled in her chest. Michael brushed it off when she told him the next morning, laughing it away as just the house playing tricks on her. But later that week, he had his own experience. While working in the basement one evening, Michael noticed something strange about one of the walls. The same wall where the hidden room had been discovered months before. He planned to patch it up and fix the exposed brick, but when he began to clear away debris, he found a small, almost imperceptible door in the corner, hidden beneath a thick layer of dust and grime. It was locked, and the key was nowhere to be found. Curiosity piqued, he tried to pry the door open, but it wouldn't budge. He made a mental note to deal with it later, feeling oddly unsettled by the sight of it. That night, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, something that seemed to be waiting, just beyond his line of sight. Things escalated quickly after that. Megan, who had been the most excited about the move, became withdrawn and moody. She complained of strange dreams and an overwhelming sense of dread that lingered in her room. She swore she heard someone whispering her name at night, a voice that was neither her parents nor anyone she recognized. When her mother checked on her one evening, Megan was sitting upright in bed, staring at the corner of her room, her eyes wide and terrified. "There's someone here," Megan whispered, her voice trembling. "I can see him. He's watching me." Sarah's blood ran cold as she tried to comfort her daughter, but the fear in Megan's eyes was unmistakable. Something was terribly wrong. By now, the Reeds could no longer ignore what was happening. They began hearing noises, footsteps, voices, and the unmistakable sound of furniture being dragged across the floor, even when no one was in the room. Doors slammed shut on their own, and lights flickered constantly, as if the house itself was rebelling against their presence. And then, one night, everything came to a head. It was a cold, stormy evening in early April. The family had gathered in the living room, trying to distract themselves from the strange occurrences with the movie. But as the wind howled outside, something far more sinister stirred inside the house. The lights began to flicker violently, casting erratic shadows across the room. The temperature dropped rapidly, and a deep, oppressive silence fell over the house. Suddenly, they heard it, a loud, deliberate knock coming from the basement door. Michael stood up, trying to steady his nerves, but before he could reach the basement door, it swung open on its own with a loud creak. The cold air that rushed out felt unnatural, like a force beyond the ordinary. Then they heard the footsteps, slow, methodical, coming up the basement stairs. Megan clung to her mother, trembling with fear, as Michael backed away from the open door. The footsteps grew louder, echoing through the house. But when Michael shone his flashlight into the darkness, there was nothing, no one there. And then from the shadows they saw it, a figure, a tall, dark silhouette that seemed to materialize from the gloom. Its face was obscured, but its presence was undeniable. It stood at the bottom of the stairs, watching them with an intensity that froze their blood. The family fled the house that night, leaving behind everything, possessions, furniture, even their new life in Fairview. They never returned. The house on Willow Street was left abandoned once again, its doors locked, its windows boarded up. But even now, residents of Fairview claim they see lights flickering inside at night, and some say they can hear the faint sound of footsteps pacing in the halls. The Edwards family was never found, and the Reeds refused to speak about their experience. The curse of Willow Street lives on, unsolved and shrouded in mystery. Whatever dark force resides within that house is still waiting, silent, watching, and biding its time.